They drank it slowly. They praised its sweetness. And within weeks, their hands began to shake, their minds unraveled, and their bodies collapsed from the inside out. This wasn't a curse. This wasn't a plague. It was wine. And the man who made it was a slave, forced to sweeten failure with lead. History remembers revolutions. It remembers generals, governors, and men who signed their names in ink. But history often forgets the hands that poisoned the glass and the silence that made it possible. This story was buried in court records, medical notes, and plantation ledgers that no one wanted to read, because it exposes something far darker than cruelty. It reveals how luxury can become a weapon, and how desperation turns elegance into murder. The cellar beneath Thornwood Estate did not smell like. They drank it slowly. They praised its sweetness. And within weeks, their hands began to shake, their minds unraveled, and their bodies collapsed from the inside out. This wasn't a curse. This wasn't a plague. It was wine. And the man who made it was a slave, forced to sweeten failure with lead. History remembers revolutions. It remembers generals, governors, and men who signed their names in ink. But history often forgets the hands that poisoned the glass and the silence that made it possible. This story was buried in court records, medical notes, and plantation ledgers that no one wanted to read, because it exposes something far darker than cruelty. It reveals how luxury can become a weapon, and how desperation turns elegance into murder. The cellar beneath Thornwood Estate did not smell like wealth. It smelled like damp stone, rotting oak, and wine that had gone wrong. This was the year 1792, and above ground, Thornwood stood as one of the most admired estates in the region, its owner praised for refinement, taste, and prosperity. Below ground, the truth waited in barrels. Thousands of gallons of what should have been a prized vintage had turned sharp and sour. Wine meant for governors now reeked of vinegar. And at the center of it all stood a man named Elias. He was known as the cellar slave, not because he belonged to the cellar, but because he understood it better than anyone alive. Elias could identify a vineyard by scent alone. He knew when grapes were stressed, when oak was too young, when a wine was beyond saving. And this wine was dead. Silas Thorne did not descend the cellar steps like a gentleman. He came down like a man being chased by numbers. His boots struck stone in uneven rhythm. His breath smelled of cheap brandy, not celebration. His silk coat hid empty pockets. To the outside world, Thorne was a titan of trade. Inside the cellar, he was bankrupt and terrified. The 1788 reserve was supposed to save him. Instead, it threatened to expose him. Creditors were circling. Rumors had reached the capital, and Thorne had already crossed lines he could never uncross. 5 years earlier, his business partner had died suddenly, and Thornwood had changed hands overnight. You can murder a man, but you cannot murder debt. Thorne stopped beside the workbench. Without a word, he reached into his coat and placed a small velvet pouch on the wood. It landed softly, heavily. "Open it," he said. Elias untied the string. Inside lay a fine white powder, bright, crystalline, almost beautiful. It looked like sugar, but when Elias smelled it, his blood turned cold. There was no sweetness, only metal. "This is how we fix it," Thorn said, quietly. His voice wasn't angry, it was calm. That terrified Elias more than shouting ever could. "You'll add this to every barrel of the spoiled vintage. It cuts the acid, rounds the bitterness, makes the wine taste rich." Elias looked at the barrels, then back at the powder. "This will kill them," he said. Thorn didn't deny it. "It will make them happy first." Elias knew what it was. So did physicians, so did chemists, so did anyone who had watched men go mad slowly. Sugar of lead, a compound known to sweeten wine and rot the body from the inside out. It dulled pain, calmed nerves, made food taste luxurious, and then it destroyed the gut, the joints, the mind. Thorn leaned closer. "If you do this," he said, "I will sign the papers." Freedom. For Elias and for his daughter. By Christmas, he promised, they would walk away. Elias knew Thorn lied as easily as he breathed, but he also knew something else. A man with chains has few choices, and hope, even false hope, is dangerous. Elias took the pouch, not because he believed the promise, but because once poison enters a system, it never stays contained. Above them, Thornwood prepared for celebration. Below them, history took a darker turn, and neither the master nor the guests yet understood one truth. The sweetness was already killing them. For the next 3 weeks, the cellar beneath Thornwood did not sleep. Neither did Elias. By candlelight, he became something between a craftsman and an executioner, not because he wanted to, but because silence had been priced higher than human life. He measured the white powder grain by grain. Too little, and the acidity would remain. Too much, and the bitterness would give way to something unmistakably wrong. There was a narrow window between luxury and suspicion. Silas Thorn wanted perfection, so Elias gave him deception. As the sugar of lead dissolved into the dark wine, Elias watched the reaction. The sharp, biting scent of vinegar softened. The liquid grew thicker, heavier, smoother. The wine did not improve. It lied. It wrapped rot in velvet. Each barrel became a sealed promise of suffering, and Elias felt every one of them like a stone added to his chest. He began carving marks into the underside of his workbench. 1 notch, 1 barrel. Not for memory, for judgment. The powder was everywhere, on his hands, in his hair, in the air he breathed. By the 2nd week, Elias's fingers trembled when he lifted the tasting cup. By the 3rd, his stomach burned constantly, like swallowed fire. Lead does not kill quickly. It moves in. And the cellar, sealed, damp, unventilated, was becoming a tomb that breathed poison back into him. But every time Elias thought of stopping, he remembered his daughter. Clara worked in the main house. She carried linens, polished silver, and listened without being seen. She had her mother's eyes, her father's patience, and a mind sharper than most men who owned land. She noticed changes: the master's temper, the constant shaking of his hands, the way the silverware returned from the wash stained black, not tarnish, but something deeper. And she noticed her father, his skin turning pale, his silence growing heavier. Something was wrong. Silas Thorne could not resist. Before a single crate left the estate, he poured himself a glass. He raised it to the candlelight, smiling. The color was deep, the aroma rich, the sweetness perfect. He drank and laughed. "It worked," he said aloud to the empty room. That night Silas slept like a child. By morning his hands would not stop shaking. The wagons rolled out at dawn, 12 crates at a time, each bottle sealed with wax, each label stamped with gold. Thorne Estate, 1788 Reserve, luxury bottled. They went to governors' tables, judges' homes, merchant banquets, where men toasted prosperity and swallowed decay. It began quietly. A man doubled over with stomach pain, another complaining of cramps, a third unable to sleep. Doctors blamed summer heat, bad water, nervous temperaments. They prescribed rest. The wine kept flowing. Within days, men could not hold quills, could not walk steadily, could not think clearly. The word spread in whispers. Plantation fever. Silas Thorne watched the numbers rise. Creditors paused, orders increased, his reputation recovered. But his body did not. His fingers twitched constantly, his stomach rebelled against food, his vision blurred at the edges. He blamed stress, he blamed others, he drank more wine. Each sip tightened the trap. One afternoon, while cleaning the study, Clara noticed something that froze her. The master's snuff box. Around its rim clung a fine white dust, the same dust she had seen on her father's clothes, the same dust that coated the cellar air. Silas Thorne was not just selling poison, he was handling it, breathing it, consuming it, slowly. That night, Clara went to the cellar. She found her father slumped over a barrel, breathing shallow. "You have to stop," she whispered. Elias looked at her and tried to smile. "Soon," he said, "the papers are coming." But Clara saw the lie in his eyes. She saw the pouch, she saw the residue, and she understood something Silas never would. This poison did not choose sides. The door slammed open. Silas stood at the top of the stairs, face flushed, eyes wild. "What is she doing here?" he shouted. Elias stood quickly, pain flashing across his face. "She was bringing water, master." Silas grabbed Clara's arm and dragged her towards the stairs. "Stay out of this cellar," he snarled. "One more mistake and I send you south." The threat hung heavier than chains. Days later, Elias went to the carriage house to retrieve more powder. That's when he found it. A folded paper, a bill of sale, dated 3 days earlier. Clara's name was clearly written. She had already been sold. The promise of freedom had been a lie from the beginning. Elias stood there, the paper shaking in his hands, realizing something worse than death. He had poisoned people for nothing. Something inside Elias broke, not loudly, quietly, the way stone cracks under pressure. Silas Thorne had taken everything. So Elias stopped counting barrels and started counting justice. That night, Silas Thorne raised another glass. His hands shook violently now. The poison had reached his nerves. What he didn't know was that the man he had trapped in the cellar had stopped obeying and started planning. Because when freedom is stolen, the only thing left to trade is truth. The first man to say it out loud was not a judge, not a governor, Not a plantation owner. It was a doctor. His name was Dr. Sterling, and he believed more in chemistry than comfort. He had been called to the Harrison estate just after midnight to examine a young aide who could no longer feel his legs. The man was 26, healthy, strong. Now he lay motionless, eyes wide with panic. Sterling had seen fevers before. This wasn't one. The patient's gums were discolored, a faint bluish line that no infection explained. His abdomen was rigid, his hands trembled uncontrollably. Sterling asked one question: "What did you eat?" The answer was always the same: wine, sweet wine, from Thornwood. By morning, Sterling had seen 4 more cases. Different estates, different households, same symptoms, same wine. This wasn't disease, it was distribution. Sterling's carriage rolled up the long oak-lined drive of Thornwood as the afternoon heat pressed down like a lid. Silas Thorne watched from the porch. He didn't like doctors. Doctors asked questions, and questions were dangerous. Sterling greeted him politely. Silas returned the gesture, but his right hand betrayed him. It shook violently. Sterling noticed. "How long has that been happening?" he asked. Silas smiled thinly. "The heat," he said. Sterling did not believe him. "I'd like to see your cellar," Sterling said. Silas stiffened. "That won't be necessary." Sterling pressed gently. "If this is poisoning, it's coming from a common source." Silas snapped. "My cellar is off limits." The words came too fast, too sharp. As Sterling was escorted out, he passed Clara in the hallway. She was carrying a tray of silver spoons. Sterling stopped, picked one up. It was black, not tarnished, corroded. "What was served this morning?" he asked quietly. Clara hesitated. "Wine," she whispered. Sterling looked at her face, at the fear, at the faint blue line forming on her gums. "Wait for me tonight," he said softly, "when the house sleeps." From the stairwell, Silas had seen the exchange. He felt the walls closing in. That evening, he locked the cellar door from the outside, left Elias below with poisoned air and candlelight, and decided the gala would not wait. The governor's tasting was moved up tomorrow night. Contracts would be signed, credit secured. Silas Thorne would survive, at any cost. Down in the cellar, Elias felt the shift. Silas was no longer pretending. He worked in darkness, but not blindly. Behind a loose stone in the wall, Elias had hidden something, a ledger. In it, he had recorded everything: dates, quantities, shipments of sugar of lead. Not for revenge, for proof. That night, Clara found Elias. She brought news. The trader was arriving early. The bill of sale was real. There would be no waiting, no mercy. Something hardened inside Elias. Silas summoned Elias to the study. A pistol lay on the desk. A bottle of the sweetened wine sat open. Silas looked terrible, skin gray, eyes sunken, hands barely obeying him. "You're moving the remaining powder tonight to the well?" Elias asked. Silas laughed. He slid the transport orders across the desk. "You think I'd free a witness?"
Elias took the papers, read them, folded them calmly. "I'll move the crates," he said. Silas smiled and drank. Back in the cellar, Elias did not follow orders. Instead, he prepared something else. He took the remaining pouches and doused the bottles meant for Silas's private table. Not enough for suspicion, enough for certainty. At dusk, Clara slipped out to the woods. Sterling waited with his kit. She handed him the pouch. Sterling tested it. The reaction was unmistakable. Lead. Before they could act, the trader arrived. 2 days early. He grabbed Clara by the hair. Elias heard her scream. The cellar door was bolted shut. Silas watched from the porch. "Take her," he said. The wagon rolled away. Chains rattled. Elias collapsed in the dark. He had proof. He had poison. But time was running out. Above him, carriages arrived. Candles were lit. Glasses prepared. The most powerful men in the state gathered to drink. And somewhere between the cellar and the dining hall, justice was deciding whether it would arrive in time.
The gala at Thornwood began exactly on time. Carriages lined the drive like trophies. Lanterns glowed warm against white columns. Music drifted through open windows. It looked like prosperity. It was a crime scene waiting to happen. Inside the dining hall, crystal glasses caught the candlelight. Silverware gleamed. The tablecloths were white, a color chosen to suggest purity. Silas Thorne entered last. He leaned heavily on his cane. Every step was calculated, every smile rehearsed. Pain twisted in his abdomen like wire, but he welcomed it. Pain meant profit. The governor lifted his glass. "Magnificent color," he said, swirling the wine. "Deep, confident." Silas bowed slightly. "The land suffered," he replied, "but discipline saved the harvest." The guests drank. The sweetness spread across their tongues, and somewhere beneath that velvet taste, metal settled into blood. Silas raised his own glass. His hand shook violently now. Wine sloshed against crystal, spilling onto his silk sleeve. He laughed it off, but the laughter sounded wrong. Thin, hollow. From the edge of the room, Dr. Sterling stood unnoticed. He had returned quietly. He had seen the wagon. He had seen the cage. And now he watched men drink poison with expressions of pleasure. He counted sips. He counted minutes. A young land surveyor dropped his fork. He stared at his hand like it no longer belonged to him. Then he slid sideways in his chair. Silence hit the room. Someone laughed nervously. Another guest clutched his stomach. The room tilted. "Stop!" The word cut through the hall like a blade. Elias stood in the doorway, clothes torn, skin stained, eyes steady. Beside him stood Dr. Sterling. Silas spun toward them. "Get him out! He's mad!" The governor raised a hand. "Wait!" His stomach cramped violently. Sterling stepped forward. He took the governor's glass, held it up, then added 3 drops from a vial. The wine changed. Not slowly, instantly. A thick black sludge bloomed in the glass, curling like ink in water. Gasps filled the room. "This," Sterling said calmly, "is lead acetate." Silas staggered. "It's a trick! The slave did this!" Elias stepped forward. He reached into Silas's coat, ripped open the pocket. A blue velvet pouch spilled white powder across the table. "Look at his hands," Elias said. They were gray, mottled, trembling beyond control. The blue line along Silas's gums was unmistakable. The poison had signed its name. The governor stared at Silas. "Drink," he said. Silas froze. "If it's safe, drink." Silas tried to run. His legs failed. He collapsed into the table, wine spilling like blood across white linen. "Arrest him," the governor said. Guards moved. Silas convulsed, vomited dark fluid. The lead had reached his brain. They dragged Silas Thorne down the stairs, into the cellar. The door slammed shut, locked from the outside. For the first time, the master knew the smell of failure. Outside, Elias ran. To the stables. The trader lay in the dirt, clutching his stomach. The poison worked quickly on the greedy. Elias broke the cage, pulled Clara free. They held each other beneath the moon. Above them, Thornwood burned with panic. Inside the cellar, a man waited to die, surrounded by the barrels that destroyed him. And as the night stretched on, one question remained unanswered. Would justice end with exposure, or would history demand payment?
Silas Thorne did not scream when the cellar door closed. He didn't have the strength. The darkness wrapped around him the same way it had wrapped around Elias for years, damp, sour, unforgiving. For the first time, there was no one left to threaten, no one to bargain with, only barrels, and the slow work of lead already eating through his nerves. By morning, Silas could no longer feel his feet. By afternoon, his hands curled inward like dead vines. The cellar air was thick with the smell of failure, spoiled wine, rotting oak, and the metallic tang of poison that never truly leaves a place once it settles. He babbled to himself. Numbers, names, debts. The empire unraveled inside his mind long before his body followed. Thornwood was no longer a home. It was evidence. Guards smashed seals, doctors catalogued symptoms, crates were dragged into the open. Thousands of bottles, luxury turned lethal, were lined up in the fields. The governor watched in silence, then gave the order. Glass shattered, red liquid soaked into the soil. The ground drank poison meant for men. They say nothing grew there again. Not grass, not vine, not hope. The land remembered. Elias's ledger was read aloud, dates, shipments, names of estates now marked by illness or death. Each entry stripped another layer from Silas Thorne's reputation. By sunset, his name was no longer spoken with respect. It was spoken with disgust. The traitor never left the property. The poison worked quickly when greed outpaced caution. By dawn, his body lay still beside the wagon he'd meant to profit from. No ceremony, no witnesses, just consequence. 3 days later, the governor signed 2 documents himself. Manumission papers. Not whispered promises, not conditional lies. Ink, seal, law. Elias and Clara were free. Silas lived for 3 months, blind, confused, shrinking into himself. Lead does not grant mercy. It strips memory first, then dignity, then breath. When he finally died, there was no procession, no stone, no name. The man who tried to sweeten his way out of ruin was buried without sweetness of any kind. Thornwood was dismantled, stone by stone.
The cellar walls were pulled apart and used to build a road that led away from the estate, a road meant for leaving. They went north, not far, far enough. Elias never touched wine again. Clara learned to read fully, openly, without fear. They did not speak of Thornwood often, but when they did, they spoke plainly, not as victims, as witnesses. There is no monument for Elias, no plaque for Clara, no chapter in most books, because history prefers its luxury clean and its poison forgotten. But sometimes truth survives anyway, etched into ledgers, carried in bodies, whispered through generations. Sugar can hide bitterness, but it cannot erase it. Silas Thorne believed wealth made him untouchable. He was wrong, because the most dangerous thing in any system is not rebellion, it is knowledge in the hands of someone with nothing left to lose. They say that on humid nights near the old road there's still a faint sweetness in the air. No one tastes it. They know better. Some things are meant to stay buried.